inability to see or hear, but we're going to keep going, and then we will post this recording later this afternoon. So just to recap, why are we here? It's to reduce the instances of resources that are failing to follow their dispatch and operating instructions. So as I mentioned before, it is a true partnership between the ISO and the different entities to make sure that resources are doing what they're instructed to do. I'm hearing some, I'm gonna mute, there we go. So sorry about that, I was hearing some background noise. So so you might be asking why, why are you here? And so what am I missing? So some of the questions that you might be asking right now are, how are inverter-based resources handled differently than our traditional resources? As technology changes, there are different ways to be able to monitor your resources and also deal with your resources. So we'll be covering that today. Also, what are the differences between a dispatch instruction and an operating instruction? We're going to clarify that because sometimes I think that becomes a little bit of the confusing part. What do the policies say about how you're supposed to respond to dispatch operating instructions and your and operating instructions? What are the guidelines that you need to be using for testing of your resources? And then what are the consequences for not responding, for not following the instructions as they're given? So we'll be going through all of that in today's training. So just kind of set some standards, some foundations. What are the difference between dispatch operating targets, or DOTs as you hear them referred to, and operating instructions? So dispatch operating targets or dispatch instructions, those are those daily instructions that your resources are receiving. They're defined as optimal dispatch, representing a single point on a dispatch operating point trajectory, and that is coming out in ADS. So that's your normal instructions that are being sent to your participating resources. And then you've also got operating instructions. Those are emergency instructions. So those are by command of operators, and they are intended to protect the system. They're preserving the state, status, output, or input of a bulk electric system resource. So that's just kind of to clarify. So as we go through, you can remember that dispatch operating targets, that's your normal daily instructions. Operating instructions would be those that are emergency situations. So how are they different? How are they handled differently? So dispatch instructions, those are received in ADS. And so the resources, they're expected to perform as instructed. And for the eligible intermittent resources, our EIRs, those, and this is for them only, they are to produce as capable unless they receive an operating instruction. And that that includes any kind of follow the dot flags and negative SUPs as well. So it's you need to be following whatever instructions are coming out through ADS for your dispatch instructions. For operating instructions, those may also be received via ADS, and those would be a result of an operator intervention, but you also may receive those via EMS and or verbal communication from the gen dispatcher. So these are required to be followed within the given timelines, and also within any kind of ramp requirements that are instructed, unless those are physically impossible to meet. So here you see an ADS example of an operating instruction. So in this case, in this one, you would see in the note field, that's going to be where it's going to indicate that you do not exceed, and then for whatever, the dot for whatever reason that may be. So the reason would be stated in that field. And then when the resource sees this, they are obligated to comply with the operating instruction within 10 minutes, and that they need to also be ramping linearly with the dispatch operating target. So this acknowledgement, that should be visible when the user from the SC organization acknowledges the pop-up. So there will be a notification in ADS that needs to be acknowledged. The message is only going to pop up once per user per time horizon of the instruction, and that is going to remain until it is acknowledged by the user. So as we start to move forward, when we start talking about testing of resources and also acknowledgement of these resources, such as we just saw in the last example, there are a few things that are very critical to be considered for proper management of the resources. So in order to, and this is for scheduling coordinators, but it's also for the different kinds of operators, for your resource operators as well. So for this proper management, ensure that you have a proper setup of resource testing and performance. So making sure that everything is set up correctly, that you have communication set up between the scheduling coordinator and the resource operator to make sure that you have adequate controls over the resource, that you're identifying who's going to be controlling them, when, in what time frame. So making sure that you have your internal processes and procedures for being able to respond in a timely manner. Making sure that the information that you're registering in master file is accurate. That's a key part in all operations, but really making sure that the information that you have in there in master file is updated, and whenever you have a change, make sure that you submit the resource data template updated to be able to get those changes in there. So that's a critical piece in order to properly manage your resources. Also, submitting detail outage cards reflecting physical limitations is a critical piece. And we're going to go through a couple of examples later for how you put the information into OMS and making sure that you've got all the correct fields so that your outages are able to be seen properly for your resources. Actively monitor your resources. For a lot of traditional resources, there was kind of a, set it and forget it maybe mentality where they run, there's pretty much consistency, but especially when we start using the intermittent resources, variable energy resources, batteries, et cetera, there is a different time frame. And so making sure that you're actively monitoring those, monitoring through ADS for any kind of flags is going to be very critical, because that is going to help you respond in a timely manner. And also responding to operating instructions within the required time parameters and consistent with any tariff requirements. So if you're a scheduling coordinator, we ask that you please share this information with your resource operators if they are not on the call, and start looking internally at how are you doing this within your organization on a continual basis, so that you are able to have your resources responding accurately. So now we're going to talk about resource testing and performance guidelines. So there are a few things to consider when you're testing to make sure that that you are able to maintain that compliance of operating instructions should you receive those. So when you're testing, this first example is for resources providing energy capacity or ancillary services, and this is all written out in Operating Procedure 5330. So the SCs are responsible for making sure that any active outage request is in WebOMS, and it's for the entire period of the test. ISO has the right to approve or deny, and that is going to be indicated in by updates in the OMS to the outage request. And resource testing may be canceled if system conditions warrant. And so that will be at the discretion of the ISO generation desk and or the shift manager. And resources seeking to test must be fully compliant with the applicable ISO telemetry standards and visible through telemetry on the ISO web, ISO EMS. So the business practice manual for direct telemetry that provides complete definitions of all the required data points. And a resource is ready to test when the outage has been approved, testing has been scheduled. And when we talk about that being scheduled, that a resource has self-scheduled their energy into the market for the applicable hours when they're able to do so. And also if there's a test plan that has been agreed to. So a few of the different responsibilities that the SC has to make sure that a proper test can be conducted. So operating procedure 5230, that applies to any of the resources that are engaged in on-site test operations and commissioning of a generating unit prior to COD or commercial operation. And so there, and then 5230A specifies any kind of additional things that you need to any requirements for NGR resources. So when submitting an outage for this pre-COD energy test in WebOMS, the scheduling coordinator should use the nature of work of the new _generator_test_energy selection. Timing is also needs to be considered for these tests. So on the day of the test, the SE needs to verify that all the information has been submitted correctly into OMS and that they've received the accurate approval. And then at least 90 minutes before the test, the SC needs to notify the ISO GenDesk via phone to confirm that everything can be started as scheduled. And then anytime prior to the test, this could again be canceled, like we mentioned on the last one, due to the discretion of the ISO GenDesk operator or the shift manager due to system conditions. For AS certification tests, go back to operating procedure 5330, and these are tests that needs to be completed to obtain the certification. And there are additional testing options that are available in operating procedure 5330 for the ancillary services, including but not limited to SE requested PMAX testing. So when submitting the outage for this kind of test, the SC should submit the outage through WebOMS using the nature of work unit _testing, and then also separately submit an applicable request for test form for a test, which is form 5330A-E, and accompanying test plan proposal. So this information needs to be submitted in order to go through this testing. Day before the test, that's when the ISO will confirm with the SC and resource operator that the schedule is set. We'll talk about the schedule, the details that need to be performed. So that will be happening the day before the test. On the day of the test, the scheduling coordinator is going to verify that OMS indicates the approval. So did you receive the approval that, from the ISO? And then if so, you're going to conduct the testing in accordance with operating procedure 5330 3.2 section. And then after the test results are calculated and the SC is going to update any applicable values, master file values via the RDT to reflect those test results. So as a note, if there are any additional pseudo-tied or dynamic resources, you will want to see section 3.4 of operating procedure 5330. So a few other little clarifications. So for testing resources on automated generation control on AGC, for resource operators, it's important that you need to make sure that your resources should be capable of implementing proper overrides to place the resource in the correct operating mode. So again, that would go back to that internal conversations that you have to ensure that the resource operators have that proper capability to implement the proper overrides. And it is important to note that during the certification testing, the resource is not going to receive any flags, any award data that could automatically place the resource, place the unit in on AGC. Resource operators also must ensure that you have the adequate state of charge available, and that needs to be throughout the entire test. And that's for any of the resources that have a battery component. And then again, making sure that you ensure your communication systems are configured to make sure that set point data is passed from the rig to all relevant controllers. Mentioned a little bit earlier, but again, we can't stress this enough. All ramping must be linear from set point to set point when performing these tests. So a little bit more about the linear ramp rate. So again, the set point that is incremental linearly from the start point to the target point, and that is going to be based on a ramp rate that is agreed upon as part of the setup. Set points are going to increment every 4 seconds, and that is going to be from start to finish. Resources are expected to respond in this linear fashion as the instructions are received. So that's where we're saying, you know, follow those dots, follow those instructions for the test, and make sure that your resource never steps above what is expected for it to be able to do during this testing, as well as for normal operations. And for this linear ramp rate, for your default ramp rate should be a controlled value. So there are some minimum data requirements for telemetry data points that need to be provided for the AGC to be able to communicate to and from the ISO's EMS. So here you have several terms. These are all better explained in the direct telemetry BPM, but a couple to note of the minimum information that is needed. All of these are, but especially like, you know, thinking about the unit control switch, the unit authority switch, automatic generation control, unit connectivity, point of delivery, state of charge. All of this data needs to be communicated, and again, needs to be accurate. And then for test conditions, a couple of points to mention is that the operating limit points, those must define the operating band that's suitable for this test or for the regular operations to be able to be done within. I mentioned a couple of the, you know, called out a couple of the telemetry data points on the last slide. So the Yukon, the UASW, the UCTL, those all must have a closed, high, or on value. The point of delivery megawatt, those readings, they need to be within the defined operating limit band, and the stated charge must be below the max energy, and that's consistent with what you have listed in the master file for that resource. And then obviously all the data quality of all the points needs to be good. We are going to be posting a handout along with this presentation and the recording of this presentation. And that's kind of a high level modified table from section 6.1 of the direct telemetry BPM. These are all going to be posted on our Learning Center later today after we have everything ready to be posted, so that you can use that, and it will help guide you, make sure that you've got the right telemetry for the test that you need to run. So here you see an example of a successful test that has that linear ramp. And so, you know, in this case, all these rules, you know, expectations that we were talking about before, they've been followed. So they identified, in this test, it was identified that the resource was available for AGC. Tests were conducted per the administrator's instruction. The set point incremented linearly from start point to target, and they did it at that agreed upon ramp rate. And the resource, responded as expected linearly as the instructions were received. You could see here, if this is what your test looks like, it means that your resource never stepped above its expected ramp rate, and that was, during that test. So this is what you want those resources to, what your test results to look like for the tests. So I see that there are some questions that are going into the chat, and I see, Mark, you're responding to quite a few of those. Thank you very much. Like we mentioned earlier, there will be Q&A at the very end, but thanks for putting these in the chat. During the Q&A at the end, we'll try to address whatever hasn't been addressed in the chat. So thank you very much for that. So moving on to, we just talked about the testing. Now let's move on to talking about the expected response when you receive these dispatch operating targets, the operating instructions. So this goes back to that proper management of your resources. So here, I know a lot of words, right? But this is from our tariff, section 4.2.1, and it spells out the how to comply with dispatch instructions and operating instructions. So in this section, it's important to note that this applies to all market participants. This includes the scheduling coordinators, UDCs, PTOs, gen operators, or participating generators, participating loads, demand response, and balancing authorities that, to the extent we have the agreements, and for your participating resources, so not your non-participating resources. But all of these should comply fully and promptly with these dispatch instructions and operating instructions, unless, number one, it would impair the public health or safety. So that's always the main concern. We want to be respectful of that. So that would be a reason to, to not be able to comply. Number two, if it's otherwise exempted pursuant to section 3413.1, or number three, it's physically impossible for the market participant to actually perform in compliance with the instructions that they receive, either the dispatch instruction or operating instruction. Shedding load for a system emergency doesn't constitute impairment to public health or safety, but if any of these conditions occur and your resource is not able to comply with the instructions, it is critical that the market participant immediately notifies the ISO of the inability to perform in compliance with the operating instruction. So again, this is a requirement by the tariff. So this is a good place to maybe learn. Also make sure that that you're sharing this information within your organization to make sure everybody's on the same page to know that this is a requirement. Couple of high-level examples just to kind of show of resources that are not following their instructions. As you can see by the different lines, the dark blue, that's the DOT that's been received. They're in the red, there's the AGC instructions, but you can see that the green, which is the plant megawatt output, that is missing the mark a lot of the time with the dispatch operating instructions, especially around the 1340 area. And then you also have the state of charge as a percent of max. So you can see how this is problematic if we're expecting resources to be able to perform and they're not following their dispatch operating targets. So this is an example of a resource that is not following their AGC set point instruction. And this next one is an example of an energy resource that's not following its dispatch instruction. So again, you could see that this is a lot of time during this particular uh, day that the resource is not following the AGC set point. It's not following where it's supposed to be going. This could lead to the implications that we're going to talk about in a little bit, as far as not following your instructions. This is risking the reliability of the grid, the safety of the grid by not following. And it's also could be problematic for your organization, you know, from a regulatory standpoint as well as a settlement standpoint. So we'll talk about that here in just a moment. So what are a couple of the steps that you can take in order to try and mitigate this exposure to your resources not following their instructions? One of the things that you can do in ADS is that you can increase your visibility to be able to show the different flags that are available on the different resources that might show up. I think a lot of people, this hasn't been as necessary maybe in some of the you know, more traditional resources, but with variable energy resources, it's much more important because you have a lot more changes, a lot more frequent changes. So going into ADS and marking the following columns visible, this will allow you to see when the resources are not following their dispatch operating targets. So you're going to want to open up the column for operating instructions start time, the operating instructions end time, the operating instruction reason, operating instructions flag, and the follow the dot flag. You'll also want to open up the real-time supplemental energy column. So those are the key columns that you want to make sure that you have up and that you're actively monitoring, so that if you do receive any kind of flag, you're able to, you know, see it and respond within the time limits. Another thing that you can do in order to be able to maintain the you know, active responses to your resource, make sure that that you're getting the right instructions for what your resource is capable of, is to use OMS to reflect your physical limitations on your resources. So the OMS, that's the primary method of making sure that you're communicating your outage related information. And that's going to provide an automated mechanism for the parties to be able to communicate all the different components of the outage, all the different pieces of information. OMS outages, those should be used for any physical resources or physical limitation to the resources at the plant. And we definitely encourage, the earlier you can submit the outage, the better. That allows the systems to be able to process, the market can optimize, you know, we can monitor the system much more accurately if we have that information as early as possible. For any outages that are non-urgent, those should be scheduled based on the practices that you find that are established in the outage management BPM, especially in specifically in section 8.2 for real-time outage submissions. Again, it's really key that coordination and communication is necessary to maintain the safety of the grid. So that's again why, you know, having this information in there, having it in there as early as possible, and having it in there as accurate as possible is very important. So to make sure that you're aware of what kind of information needs to be put in, especially for the variable energy resources. We've got a couple of examples here. So for your outages, you should always have your SCID, the market resource ID, and any kind of detailed description of what the issue is with your resource that is requiring this outage. As far as selecting the nature of work, we had some suggestions up above of what to choose for the testing, but for regular outages, you'd want to refer to operating procedure 3220, section 3.3.1, nature of work category. So that will give you the example of what it is that you want to, that you would need to put in there, such as this example for solar, it was selected for plant trouble. From an availability standpoint in your outage, you're going to want to make sure that your availability PMAX, that is your discharge capability. So what is that value? That's what needs to be input here for AS availability. That's for, again, your regulation up, down, spin, and non-spin. And what you need to question is, can your resource provide for their awards that they receive? If not, then you're going to want to go in and enter 0 for the appropriate product. So don't just leave it alone. Just make sure that you're entering a 0 for that appropriate product. And then for the PMIN re-rate, if your resource minimum output needs to be adjusted up, that's when you're going to fill out that field. So these are pieces of information that you need to be putting in and make sure that you have all of these fields completed for a solar outage, solar resource outage. Now we have a battery example, and so additional information needs to be put into these into the outage card for these battery resources. So again, please be sure that you're paying attention to this information that goes in there, sharing with those who are responsible for putting in your outages, that we need this kind of detail for these resources. So just like the other one, that all the way down to nature of work, that is all the same. You need to have that kind of information put in there, again, as much detail as possible. And then again, for your availability PMAX, that's your discharge capability, regulation up and down, non-spin, spin for your AS availability, same thing. If you can't provide for your award, enter a 0 for the appropriate product. Then you're also going to want to add in to the adage, since this is a battery resource, your max energy, and that is going to be your maximum state of charge in megawatt hours. You'll also want to put in your minimum energy, which is the minimum state of charge megawatt hours, and your load max PMIN, which is your charging capability. So again, please, especially once this presentation is provided, really encourage you to take this information, roll these into your internal procedures to make sure that you're capturing this data that needs to be submitted for battery outages. So what happens if you are not complying with your operator instructions for whatever reasons? Now we're going to talk about what those implications are if your resource fails to comply. We're going to talk about that from a settlements, regulatory, and enforcement standpoint. So for settlements, that's where you have economic consequences. From a regulatory standpoint, that's where there are contractual consequences. And enforcement, that is an escalation that it could lead to a report or a referral to FERC, to NERC or WEC, and to the ISO Department of Market Monitoring. So let's break those down and to kind of look at what are those implications. So for settlements, these are economic consequences for failing to comply with dispatch and operating instructions. And those could be for deviating from your dispatch instructions. So you get the settlement charge of any kind of deviations paid or charged, and that will be at the real-time LMP, and it will show up on your settlement statement as uninstructed imbalance energy. So it could be quite expensive if you got a really good price in the day ahead and then you deviated in uninstructed. We're going to look at that real-time LMP. If that price is quite a bit higher, that could be quite a hefty charge that you're going to see back through that charge code. And then your ancillary services, regulation, those deviations, they could be blocked or charged back as well. There are also reliability penalties that are, that if those are assessed against the ISO for these penalties, we may look at that, and based on causation, we will we may allocate those fees out to those scheduling coordinators that had non-compliant resources that caused more of the problems with the system condition, toward those system conditions. So settlements is definitely your day-to-day implication that you can get for, not following your dispatch operating instructions, and definitely for not following your operating instructions as well. From a regulatory standpoint, scheduling coordinators are required to notify the ISO if their resource is unable to comply with dispatch or operating instructions. So it's not, you need to let us know if your resource is incapable. That needs to be put in. Again, if it's physically enabled, that needs to be through an outage card, or if it's, or it might need to be, or through ADS if you're not able to, to put that in there. So anyway, these need to be notified. ISO needs to be notified. Sorry for the distraction. Failing to comply with these instructions that the operators give, these, this could be in violation of the ISO tariff, of your scheduling coordinator agreement, and your resource interconnection agreement, and participating generator agreement. So, by participating with, with the ISO, you've already agreed to these standards. So that's why you are required to follow these instructions. The ISO may end up investigating these deviations if we find that there's repeated or adverse behavior, and we might address that through either formal notifications of noncompliance. We would be contacting the applicable entities for that. There may be a good faith negotiation that our legal department works on, or Department of Market Monitoring. We might need to go there with the resource owners, the operators, and with the ISO. We might have to escalate this as a referral to the applicable enforcement regulators that I mentioned a couple slides back. And then also it could escalate to a point of revocation of any applicable certification. So work with you, but we want to make sure that it doesn't get to this point. So that's why that active management and monitoring of your resources and communication with the ISO is so critical. From an enforcement standpoint, the scheduling coordinators and or resources that fail to comply with the tariff and binding agreements need to self-report, and that would be to FERC. Also, if you're under the NERC WEC umbrella, then you would also need to self-report noncompliance to them if you're unable, if you fail to comply with the operating instructions. So scheduling coordinators and our resources that fail to comply with the operating instructions may also be referred to our ISO Department of Market Monitoring, and that could lead to a code of conduct violation. So again, we just want to make sure that this is important to note, because we don't want you to face this. And just kind of a quick note about the non-compliance and necessary to self-report to FERC. This is another reason why following operating instructions is so important, because you see there under the first sub-bullet, under the first bullet, FERC has civil penalty authority of up to $1.49 million per violation. So that is quite a hefty value that could be applied to your organization. So you obviously don't want that to happen to your organization, but if you're the one that is receiving these and responsible for following these dots, you also don't want to be the one explaining why you were able to do this. So, paying attention to everything that we've covered so far and why this is so important to follow your dispatch operating instructions, for following operating instructions. This is going to be better off for you in the long run and your organization, to keep you from going down this enforcement path. So to wrap up, we just have a few minutes left. we went through quite a bit of information. We went through testing. We defined the difference between a dispatch operating target and a dispatch or an operating instruction. We also went through the testing process and what those requirements are. We put in how we talked about how to accurately manage your resources through accurate and detailed outage cards, through proper monitoring through ADS, through communications between your different your resource operator and the SC. So right now we've got just a few minutes. We're going to spend about the next 5 minutes to answer any kinds of questions you have. So at this time, I see we've already got a hand, at least one hand raised. So we ask you that, we'll call on you if your hand is raised to speak up verbally. We'll also be kind of looking at the chat. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and start by looking. You see the first hand that's raised is Chris Bremer. I hope I pronounced your last name right.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you. This is Christopher Bremer, Salt River Project. A quick question on this. What are the expectations of non-participating resources as it relates to dispatch instructions?
So this is applicable to your participating resources. So these operating instructions are not applicable to your non-participating resources.
And Heidi, this is Heather Curley in CAISO Legal, and I will just add a clarification that non-participating resources, they don't have a contractual relationship with the ISO, but if they have signed an EIM participating resource agreement, this does apply equally to them. Does that answer your question, Chris?
Yes, so only participating resources within the EIM are expected to comply with their dispatch instructions, and non-participating resources within the Western EIM are not expected by the ISO to comply with dispatch instructions.
No, that's not correct. All resources are expected to comply with dispatch and operating instructions as part of good utility practice in a partnership in reliability.
Okay, would they still be assessed any sort of UIE charge or settlement for failure to comply?
I think we should take these type of detailed questions offline, given the small bit of time we have. But the answer is in the settlement of the WEAM and how those would be settled. But again, we'll note that we expect each BA in the WEAM has similar instructions to CAISO to follow dispatch and operating instructions. So we're happy to take it offline, but to maintain system reliability, particularly through tight summer conditions, we do expect, and we expect our fellow balancing authorities share the view that resources should be following their dispatch and operating instructions.
All right, thanks for that question, Chris. And like I said, we'll follow up with that more clearly, and we might even, Mark, maybe we'll work with you to get that to be a discussion that we maybe can have in the next WEIM ops meeting, if applicable. So let's see. I know that there's quite a bit of chat. I have not been paying attention to as much. So are there any, Rhoda, are there any questions that we should address that are in the chat? Oh, actually, I see that before we do that, Bronson, I see your hand is raised. So Bronson, we'll start with you and then we'll go to Mike McGuffin.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Hi, this is Bronson from LADP. So my question is about the MRTU market. Let's say we are awarded in the day-ahead market and CAISO decides to change the award in the real-time market. How is that communicated to the dispatchers? Is that communicated through ADS?
So they will see that. Oh, I'm sorry, was somebody speaking?
Nope, go ahead, Heidi.
Okay, so yes, they will see those in ADS. They'll see the instructions based on market optimization.
Okay. And then, so if the award is changed in the real-time market, are the dispatchers, are they able to reject the change in dispatch?
You're expected to follow that unless you're physically unable to, unless you're physically unable to, because the market's going to be optimizing for, they're going to be giving you the RTPD instructions to start up, shut down, transition, et cetera. Then you're going to get the dispatch instructions in real time. And so those are what you're expected to follow. So like we said earlier, you're expected to comply with those. Those are your instructions of what to follow, unless physically unable to, and for those that we talked about earlier. So if you don't, that's where you're going to end up with settlement, implications, because you're going to be awarded in the day ahead, but then we're going to look at what you actually produced, and anything that's difference between there, that's where you're going to get the uninstructed imbalance settlement. So does that help?
I guess my question is, if we're expecting something from the day-ahead award and it's changed in real time, can we reject the real-time instruction and stick with the day-ahead award?
No.
No.
Yeah, and Bronson, Mark Richardson from the California. So are you referring to an hourly block intertie schedule, or are you talking about a good old-fashioned generator within LA's BAA?
Yes, an intertie schedule with the MRTU market.
Okay, so if you're talking about an hourly block resource,
Yes.
I would want to point you to the market instruments BPM as well as the ADS user guide, because there is some partial accept or reject functionality that the scheduling coordinator has access to.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks, Bronson, for the question. All right. Let's go to Mike McGuffin. Or McGowan, sorry. No, it is McGuffin, sorry.
It is McGuffin. You got it the first time. Given the Cal ISO doesn't have an operator certification process similar to other markets, have you guys considered putting together somewhat of a targeted, I know you have the online tutorials, something that's targeted specifically for, real-time desk operators to help in the training of those people?
That's a great question, and we have been looking at it for a little while now. We are in discussions of what that would look like, how we would roll that out. It's going to be a bit, so it definitely won't be in 2023, but stay tuned for that, because we do recognize that a lot of organizations, you've got a lot of new folks that are coming in, and we certify the entity, and maybe one or two people go through the training, and then they leave the company, and maybe that kind of falls short of the new folks. So we are talking about that internally to see what that would look like. And as we formalize that, we will definitely be sharing that with all the organizations. So, for right now, we do have the CBTs that are available. We're looking at, what we can do as in a stopgap, maybe a formalized course map that can help, you to be able to roll into your own training, internal training for your new folks. But, we are looking to make that more formalized. So great question, and definitely stay tuned for that, because we definitely understand that there's a need for that.
Right. Yeah, looking forward to it. Thank you.
Thanks. Great question. All right, Ken, I see your hand is raised.
Yeah, it's looking at the last couple of slides, settlements, regulatory and enforcement regarding the, compliance with dispatch operating targets. I didn't notice the timing component. Does any of the business practice manuals mention kind of how long it would be to deviate from some kind of operating instruction or dispatch operating target where we start looking at that regulatory and enforcement piece of that? Is that listed anywhere?
Yes, it is.
Heidi,
Yes.
you got it? Okay.
Yeah, go ahead, Heather.
Well, so I think there was a couple elements to that question. So if you're an eligible intermittent resource and it's only a dispatch instruction, you are permitted to generate as capable when your forecast is equal. But are you asking about how long you have to notify the CAISO if you cannot comply with an operating instruction? That is in the tariff. You'll find it in section 7.
Okay, because it seems like most stuff's more about integrated hourly, right? And besides some of those instructions, and I wasn't sure how that did for long-term effects of not being able to operate to whatever instruction or schedule those generators are. They should be operating at, but the market says they're operating at a different, different target.
Right. For operating instructions, it's really a strict compliance regime. We issue operating instructions because they're necessary to maintain system reliability. And so for those slides you were referencing, you can expect that a continued pattern of deviation or failure to comply, or when our operators phone a failure to take action, that those will warrant a number of those regulatory and potential enforcement slides. We heard the request from the prior for kind of some additional test training and more information, and we're committed to providing that to assist everyone in getting into full compliance.
Okay, so it's more like a subjective item where a behavior of like not operating rather than a specific time requirement or a time component of not operating for a certain amount of time. That's what it seems more of as far as what the intent is.
The intent is to capture those who don't comply with operating instructions as well as dispatch instructions. The operating instructions require compliance within 10 minutes.
Okay, thank you.
Great, thanks. Great question. Let's go to Joe, and then I've got a couple of questions. We're going over by a few minutes, so thank you guys for sticking in there. We want to get a couple of these questions answered, but any questions that we don't get to from a time standpoint, definitely keep putting them in the chat, and we'll send out a response with all of the answers to the questions. So Joe, go ahead.
Hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Thanks.
Okay, great. Can you explain the difference between the ADS and the AGC and the connection there? My impression is that's only related to resources that are on reg. Is that a true statement, or does anybody know?
So might let one of these subject matter experts do a better explanation, but the AGC, that is for every 4 seconds. That's for your regulation resources, and they do feed into one another into the ADS, but maybe one of our subject matter experts could hop in and just do a little better explanation of that. I don't know. I'm looking real quick to see who I have.
Heidi, as you look through your list to get a better answer, I'll provide the high level, which is it's correct that AGC is for regulation. We're seeing this issue present from scheduling coordinators in the regulation, in the failure to follow operating instruction, but also in the energy market. We wanted to capture both in the training.
Yeah, I was wondering if there's any push to just send the signal through just the regular gen, the energy side as well, that might alleviate some of these issues. I'm not sure if that's come up. I'm sure it's been talked about. That happens in other markets. They're just everybody's on AGC all the time, and it's just feeding instead of popping off. You're on AGC, you may pop off an energy, you may pop back on, and it's a manual, I think, process for some people. It can be automated, but it's work for everybody to do. But anyway, had another question, just real quick. For intermittent resources, are they required to put in real-time offers? And if not, how are they being controlled through the ADS, I guess, is my question. Or where is it getting its numbers to move them around? And are they supposed? And I think you said they're supposed to follow the ADS, but normally they're just running. I'm not sure if that's always been that way or what, but any kind of clarification around that would be helpful.
Heidi, let's add bidding questions to a follow-up, just given that we're running over on time.
Okay, yeah, that was a great question, and we do have some information that just due to time we had taken out for that had to do with bidding. So we'll definitely add that into to your questions, and then if you have follow-up questions, please feel free to send them our way. Does that work for you, Joe?
Sure.
Great, thank you for that. Um, so just let's see. There are a few questions in here. We definitely want to make sure that we're addressing these and we don't want to rush them. So we're going to go ahead and just wrap up now, but we will be responding to each and every one of your questions. We're capturing those. And we'll make sure that you have this. The presentation is going to be posted as well as the recording and a reference guide for the telemetry. And the answers to these questions will be sent out to everybody who's participating in today's call. So just to recap, making sure that you're setting up your resources for testing and performance, communicating with your, between SCs and your resource operators, making sure that you're monitoring your resources very actively through ADS, and making sure that you're responding to these operating instructions within the required time parameters to be consistent with the tariff requirements. And we will point those out more specifically in the questions that we post. Then, those are the things that need to be done. And again, we are all in this together. This is all to make sure that we maintain that safety of the bulk electric system for our customers, for our for ourselves, for our entities. So we ask that, kind of pay attention to this level setting, and then, we'll get more information as we go forward. So I want to thank you for your participation. We will be sending out a survey after this. We encourage you to ask more questions in there, that if you didn't get your questions in today, you can also send your questions regarding this training to customer readiness at caiso.com. So for anything in the training, if you have questions that are specific to your resource about, how to make sure that they're following the instructions, what kind of problems you might be experiencing, any kind of challenges, we do ask that you put in a city ticket, because our customer experience team, they're going to process those, get those to the right subject matter experts, and they're going to be able to respond to your particular needs. And so, and another thing, again, this is a level setting. We will be creating a CBT that will be posted at around the end of August. So stay tuned for that notification. We will put out a notice when that's available that covers all of these topics. We'll be incorporating your questions into it, into that CBT that will be a little more robust than what we have in today's training. And that will be posted, so you can wrap that in and share that within your organization, and maybe wrap it into your internal training programs. When we post this, there are some links as well on the last 3 slides. So when you see this posted, that will help you to be able to access deeper information. With that, I want to thank you very much for your time, for staying over a few minutes extra, for Rada Madrigal for being a great producer today, and for our subject matter experts for all of their input. And again, thank you for your time, for your questions, and for your interest in this topic. We'll be looking for more opportunities to train on this in the future. So have a great day, and we will be talking to you again later. Thanks. Bye-bye.